where the rates are dangerously low. And this is particularly important as we learn more about Omicron. So let me give you some figures. From my own country, Ireland, where vaccination rates are among the highest in Europe at 93% of the adult population, the deaths per 1 million population over the last 14 days were 15. But in 2 other European countries with vaccination rates of less than 50%, the equivalent death rates were over 250 per 1 million of the population. So from the data we have seen and we continue to see, the authorised vaccines remain effective and continue to save people from severe disease and from death. Even if the new variant becomes more widespread, the vaccines we have will continue to provide protection. Now, the effectiveness of these vaccines is waning over time, and it's becoming increasingly clear that people will need to extend their protection with a booster. Again, very important with the threat of the new variant. In October, we recommended the use of booster doses in people over 18 years for the 2 mRNA vaccines. And an application is now underway for assessment of data from the Janssen COVID vaccine. And in addition to the studies from the clinical trials, the data on the impact of boosters in real life shows that booster doses restore or extend protection against infection and disease. We're also looking at mix and match booster strategies where the booster vaccine is different from the vaccine used for primary vaccination. There are many studies that suggest that such an approach could restore protection as effectively as a booster with the same vaccine. And we're working to develop a recommendation on this that will be useful for Member States. We hope to have this very shortly, possibly even by the end of the week. So last week, our experts agreed to extend the use of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine to children from 5 years of age. This is another important measure to help curb the current 4th wave we're seeing in some Member States. Children in this age group will receive a third of the normal adult dose. And as we have done consistently over the past 22 months, we have fast-tracked the evaluation, but at the same time ensuring that the highest level of scrutiny is observed. This scientific recommendation on the possible use in children and the recent approval of boosters will help guide Member States' decisions. Member States are best placed to take into account local conditions, the spread of the virus, the level of vaccination, the availability of different vaccines, and the capacities of the national health systems. Let me also reassure you about the safety aspects. I think it's very important to remember that this is the biggest data set we have ever had on any vaccine or any medicine worldwide. And we've shown that the pharmacovigilance system is able to pick up rare side effects and to make sure that these are managed. So not only do we have an extremely well-functioning pharmacovigilance system, but we can take action where needed. Our collective efforts. So I think it's also important to talk about the therapeutics that we're now looking at. We have already authorized 3 therapeutics against COVID-19, and one of these was last year, remdesivir, and 2 recently in October. These are the 2 recent ones are monoclonal antibodies, and they provide effective treatment, particularly for adults that are at severe risk of consequences of COVID. We also have very promising news from clinical trials on 2 oral antivirals. These are products that are developed by the companies Merck and Pfizer, respectively. Of course, oral treatments are easier to administer than injections, and they can therefore substantially improve access to patient care. But again, we're working quickly and rigorously in a stepwise manner. This includes providing scientific advice to Member States on the conditions under which they could make them available in national emergency use programs ahead of a marketing authorization. This is the so-called Article 5.3 procedure. But it's extremely important that we do our own independent assessment of the data and that our experts weigh the benefits against the possible risks before we decide on whether these medicines can be recommended for marketing authorization or not. We have a couple of other therapeutics in the pipeline, specifically some immunomodulators that are under review. And I'm very optimistic that in the medium to long term, these different classes of medicines will make a difference, complement the vaccines, and make a difference for people suffering from COVID. This is a complex disease with many different stages and different manifestations in different people. None of the medicines going through the system are a magic bullet on their own, but all new treatments are a much-needed addition to the toolbox and give us hope and possibilities for patients. Over the last 12 months, our number one priority has been to support the availability of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. But we have not forgotten that patients have other medical needs. In 2020, we recommended 97 new human medicines for approval. This is the highest number in 10 years. And also, we recommended 20 new medicines for animals. The picture this year is also very positive. Among the newly authorized medicines are several treatments for rare genetic disorders. Excuse me, I think The picture this year is also positive, and among the newly authorized medicines are several treatments for rare genetic disorders, where previously there were no therapeutic options. Addressing unmet needs is part of our ongoing strategies and brings hope for many. Cancer medicines are also high on our agenda, supporting the ambition of the European Commission's Beating Cancer Plan. Since EMA was established back in 1995, we have authorized more than 170 new cancer medicines via the centralized procedure. So, when I spoke to you last year, before I became Executive Director, I said that COVID-19 exemplifies many of the challenges and complexities that EMA and the EU medicine system currently face. And this includes ensuring availability of medicines and medical devices, supporting development of innovative medicines, and working with upstream and downstream decision makers as well as patients and healthcare professionals. We are very hopeful that you will adopt the extension of our mandate today, and this is a recognition of our collective efforts during COVID. It gives us new tools to tackle many of the challenges that the medicine system is faced with, from coordination national responses to shortages of critical medicines, to supporting innovation, particularly in crisis situations, but also in preparing for other health threats, including antimicrobial resistance, the silent pandemic, which is also a cause for concern. So I'd like to thank all of you who worked on the extended mandate for EMA, and especially the rapporteur, Mr. González Casarvas, and all the shadows in the groups for the trust you have placed in the agency. The new EMA regulation is one of the building blocks of the Health Union and is setting the stage for even more structural and ambitious reforms under the pharma strategy next year. I will make it my priority as Executive Director to deliver on this ambitious vision and to offer you and all EU institutions EMA's scientific expertise in the development of future legislative reforms. Now, we have two important milestones coming up in January next year concerning two significant new pieces of legislation which were adopted by this committee. The first one is the Clinical Trials Regulation. It's been a long time coming, but the regulation and the IT system that we have developed is now ready to go live. And these tools will now support some of our ambitious plans for clinical trials in the EU that will put Europe back on the map as an important global player in medical research. We're also on target to deliver the new veterinary medicines regulation at the end of January 2020, and we have worked extensively over the past 3 years to develop 4 major new IT systems and to support over 25 implementing pieces of legislation. The veterinary regulation reshapes medicines for animals and puts a stronger emphasis on the connection between human and animal health. So exciting times even in the non-COVID area. None of this would have been possible without the work of the national experts who are the backbone of EMA's scientific work. It's thanks to their tireless efforts and indeed the dedication of my own staff that we have made such progress over the past year. I'd also like to thank Anthony Borg and Matthias Groote, who represent the Parliament on our management board and who we'll hear from later, and they've provided very helpful inputs into our work, as well as Mr. Boussoy, who is our contact for MEP, for your valuable support. Dear Chair, it's been a demanding and dynamic year, and we've worked very hard and rigorously to help keep people safe from severe disease and death. We've also made significant progress on many other treatments from patients, notably those suffering from cancer and rare genetic disorders. We're on target for the clinical trials and veterinary legislation implementation, and I want to thank you for helping us in our work and helping us at the moment now to extend our mandate at a time when the pandemic has made us all so aware of how important safe and effective medicines and vaccines are for the European population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Director for the EMA. We will turn now to all the members, and can I ask everyone to please be precise in the questions so that I can take as many questions as possible. But first, as said, of course, I will give the floor to Christian Boussoy, who is our NV contact person to the EMA. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eickhout. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate Director Imre Cook and her team in EMA for the efforts and the excellent results in the last 18 months. Regarding the COVID-19 situation, you have mentioned about contingency plans for the new variants, and maybe you'll elaborate a little bit in the context of Omicron and what we should do on the medium and long term in order to be prepared for such situations. Regarding COVID-19 therapeutics, we have promising news indeed, as you mentioned, while the use of outpatient oral antiviral therapeutics are getting new options, and we have seen very encouraging data coming out during the last couple of weeks. This will help us to prevent hospitalization or while some patients will be in the hospital, to prevent serious cases and ICU cases. My question would be what we can do to make sure that rolling reviews and conditional market authorizations take into account the whole body of evidence that is already available. And finally, in 2020, EMA recommended 97 new human medicines for approval, the highest number in 10 years, as well as 20 new medicines for animals. And you mentioned the important therapeutic areas like rare genetic disorders and, of course, new medication for cancer, which is extremely important for European Parliament and for EMA. This was a part of your hard work to fight against the COVID pandemic. And you mentioned that next year we'll have to implement the trial clinical trials regulation and also the HTA. And of course, the new extended mandate of EMA will start to be implemented as the legislation was successfully negotiated between the European Parliament and the Council. So my question is if you have enough staff and enough budget for all these new tasks. Thank you so much.
Good question. Very good question. I'm curious for the answer, indeed. This has nothing to do with the talk you had before, I guess. We now turn to all the members through Catch the Eye. And first I would like to give the floor to Peter Liese from EPP.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma Cook, for your presentation and all your hard work. And let me give you a special thank you for the recommendation of last week for the children, especially children that suffer from diseases like Down syndrome or cardiac failure. They desperately waited for this decision and their parents. I have 3 questions. First, there is already the official application from the company Novavax for their vaccine. Is there already a date foreseen when you will decide on the recommendation? And which date is that? The second question, you mentioned the variants, and we are all really concerned about this Omicron. We made this decision last year for a speedy adaptation. Could you outline again the process if there is an adaptation of the vaccine? How fast would it go, and what is the role of EMA in this? And my last question is, in fact, on the booster. I think it's more and more clear that it would be advisable for all adults to get the booster. But the structure of EMA is, of course, not that you can immediately analyze every data. You are also depending on the companies. And what can we change so that you can also use real-life data? Because my feeling is we were all a bit late in preparing the booster. And that is the biggest problem is, of course, that people don't get the first and second dose. But we could have been better if we were faster with the booster. So what can we improve in the process here? Thank you.
Thank you very much. For S&D, we have the rapporteur of the report on EMA, which we are voting on right now, Nicolás González.
Gracias, presidente. Y gracias a Mercook por venir hoy y también porque ha sido un placer trabajar durante estos meses. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I wait.
Otherwise,
yes, it's better. Now I change into Spanish again. Gracias, presidente, y a Mercook por estar hoy aquí. Ha sido un placer trabajar con la Agencia Europea del Medicamento y con todo su staff en este proceso legislativo que hoy finalizamos con el voto, eso espero, de los colegas, y creo que vamos a reforzar el papel de la agencia, como bien se ha dicho, y espero que algunos de los problemas que ha apuntado el señor Busoy también se puedan ir reforzando pues con el trabajo que hemos realizado en este paquete legislativo. Lo cierto es que manda la actualidad y vemos cómo esta nueva variante Omicron está llegando a Europa. No sabemos el alcance, hay por ahora bastante desconocimiento, pero sí es cierto que tenemos una vía rápida de adaptación para las nuevas cepas de vacunas. Y sabemos que hay algunas vacunas que tienen más posibilidad de hacerlo de una manera más rápida y ágil que otras. Me gustaría saber cuál sería el tiempo estimado que la agencia tardaría en hacer ese proceso de revisión, porque primero tendrían que ser los laboratorios quienes presentaran su nueva vacuna adaptada a esas variantes o esa variante de la vacuna, pero me gustaría saber el tiempo que tardaría más o menos la agencia, disponiendo de todos los datos, está claro. También me gustaría saber, detallar un poquito más cuáles son las otras 4 vacunas que esperan en el rolling review, aunque ya nos ha dicho que Novavax está próxima a realizar su assessment, es decir, su evaluación final. Y, por último, me gustaría preguntar si no cree o no tiene conocimiento la Agencia Europea del Medicamento de cuáles son los factores que llevan a que algunos Estados miembros vayan tan despacio o por detrás en sus ratios de vacunación. Es decir, si tiene alguna información. Sé que no es el rol de la agencia revisar eso, pero si tiene alguna información de cuáles son las causas por las que se produce esto. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And now we have for Renew, Friedrich Reis.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, good morning, Mrs. Cook. It's a pleasure to have you with us once again. It was a pleasure to work closely with you on the reinforced role of the agency during times of crisis this past month. We're voting on this this morning. I will probably echo some of my colleagues' questions, and I will switch to French. As you mentioned, le renforcement de cette protection vaccinale, les doses, les troisièmes doses, les boosters sont clairement la priorité pour le moment. Les contaminations explosent. L'Europe est devenue l'épicentre mondial de la pandémie. Les hôpitaux sont sous pression. Et puis, il y a l'apparition de ce nouveau variant, l'Omicron, le variant détecté en Afrique du Sud. Alors, j'ai 3 questions à vous poser. Quels sont vos éléments de certitude, car on est conscient qu'on ne peut pas parler de certitude dans cette pandémie, sur l'efficacité à long terme de ces boosters, principalement les Pfizer et les Moderna pour le moment. J'entends que la Commission, et on le sait, travaille sur les nouvelles définitions du certificat Covid et va proposer très probablement de le limiter à 9 mois. Donc, est-ce qu'on se dirige ici vers une administration annuelle, bisannuelle? Enfin, quels sont les éléments dont vous disposez à cet égard pour le moment? Est-ce que cette troisième injection, j'entends les déclarations des différents labos, de Pfizer notamment, mais est-ce qu'elle protège contre le variant Omicron, alors que tous ces cas sont en train de se multiplier en Europe, les pays tombent les uns après les autres. Question peut-être plus délicate, comment est-ce que la généralisation de cette troisième dose en priorité aux plus de 40 ans, telle que recommandée par l'EMA et par les CDC, est-elle compatible avec la situation qui a été évoquée de la vaccination dans toute une série d'États membres, la Croatie, la Slovaquie, la Roumanie, la Bulgarie, pour ne citer que quelques-uns, où la couverture vaccinale n'atteint même pas les 50%. Alors vous avez évoqué, puisqu'il me reste quelques secondes, la question des traitements qui figurent aussi dans notre boîte à outils et fort heureusement, l'EMA a commencé à travailler sur l'évaluation de la demande d'autorisation du Lagevrio. Vous étudiez également les données qui sont fournies, je conclus par Pfizer sur le Paxlovid. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire quand ces traitements seront disponibles aux adultes qui en ont besoin? Cette année encore? Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. For the Greens, Tilly Metz.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. I'm happy that you are with us, dear Mrs. Cook. Clinical trial transparency is always important, but it is especially important during the COVID-19 pandemic, where regulatory decisions are made quickly by government officials and where vaccines are administered on such a wide scale. Taxpayers' funds have heavily contributed to research and development of COVID-19 vaccine trials and should have the right to access to the result. However, I note that there is an insufficient availability of COVID-19 vaccine trial documents and data. In May 2021, a WHO report found that out of 86 clinical trials for 20 COVID-19 vaccine, only 12% of clinical trials protocol were made publicly available. This is not just an issue of taxpayers' fund, but also an issue of trust. Trust in the European institution can be built by transparency. And citizens have the right to be informed and to have access to the data they have founded. Even though the EMA counts among the one of the regulators that provides the greatest availability of data at present, how will you ensure that the remaining studies and data will be made publicly available, and when do you think we can have access to them? I was very happy that you said that we need also independent assessment of the data provided. You also might know that I'm greatly interested in accelerating the transition to animal-free science. That's why I would like to take the chance to follow up on the EMA's Joint 3Rs working group that has had its mandate renewed, which is to be welcomed. Does the group also now have a new work plan, and when will it resume its work? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For the left, I have Katarina Konechna.
Krásný den ode mne. Děkuji moc paní ředitelce za její úvodní slova. Každopádně jsem se chtěla zeptat na jednu věc, protože my jsme tady před létem už slyšeli od šéfů farmaceutických společností, že mají rozpracované vakcíny proti mutacím COVID-19 jako Delta a podobně. Pokud si dobře pamatuju, na jednom jednání nám dokonce šéf Moderny říkal, že představení jejich modifikované vakcíny je otázkou 100 dní. Dokonce z důvodu, aby byly takové vakcíny co nejdříve vyvinuty, jsme zde my, parlamentu, měnili pravidla pro jejich vývoj. Dosud však nejenom, že nebylo požádáno o autorizaci žádné modifikované vakcíny, ale dokonce nebyla ani jedna taková představena. Budí to samozřejmě řadu otázek a spekulací, tou hlavní je proč. A je to snad z důvodu toho, že chtějí farmaceutické společnosti co nejvíc finančně vytěžit původní patent a změna výroby by pro ně nebyla tak výhodná, nebo to má jiný důvod. A jak to tedy, paní ředitelko, vypadá s modifikovanými vakcínami? Jak je jejich vývoj daleko? Myslím, že všechny nás děsí, co dalšího a dalšího přichází a měli bychom znát odpovědi. Děkuju.
Thank you very much. For EPP, I have Madame Dolores Montserrat.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try to do it in 1 minute. 3 questions. At the end of February, we participated in the launch of the structured dialogue on the security of medicine supply. Now the initiative is in its second and final stage, preparing concrete measures to strengthen the resilience of the pharmaceutical supply chain. So don't you think that this structured dialogue should be continued and periodically conducted by the new established EMA Medicine Shortage Steering Group? This is the first question. The second one, I think that we had success in the rolling review. So my question is, do you think it will be possible to apply it to other life-saving medicines for rare disease, for example, or pediatric cancer, to accelerate its access in all the European countries at the same time? And the third question is about the Omicron. Is the EMA and ERA working together without duplications? And is EMA and ERA incubator receiving enough and timely information on their results from the member states to early identify new variants? Is this preparedness and response plan at the European Union level already working, or we still needed to set it up? Is it possible to receive information from third countries on the spread of new variants and its codification before we find positive cases in the European territories, as we have in the flu? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For Renew, Véronique Trillet-Lenoir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais à mon tour remercier Madame Cook pour sa mobilisation et son efficacité dans la gestion de cette crise, ainsi que toutes ses équipes, et dire à mon tour à quel point il me semble que les progrès que nous avons enregistrés pendant cette crise pourrait, me semble-t-il, être transposé à d'autres pathologies que la pathologie SARS-CoV-2. Cela vient d'être dit. Je repose la question, est-ce que vous pensez que le système d'enregistrement rapide et continu des médicaments pourrait nous aider pour les maladies rares, et merci pour les efforts que vous avez faits, et pour les cancers? Deuxième question, la création de l'autorité ERA, qui est majoritairement pensée pour les crises sanitaires et en particulier les pandémies vous paraît-elle de nature à pouvoir également répondre dans l'avenir à des problématiques posées par des maladies rares et génétiques ou par des maladies chroniques graves comme le cancer? Encore merci pour vos réponses.
Merci beaucoup. Et for the Greens, Michel Rivasi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci, Madame Cook, d'être parmi nous. Alors, j'ai deux questions à vous poser. D'une part, vous avez recommandé l'utilisation du vaccin communautaire de Pfizer chez les 5-11 ans. Or, on vous avait posé toute une série de questions auxquelles vous n'avez toujours pas répondu avec ma collègue Tilly Metz et mon collègue Pedicini. Concernant la qualité des données fournies par les laboratoires et le suivi des effets indésirables des vaccins Pfizer et Moderna. La cohorte utilisée, c'est 2000 enfants, dont seulement 1000 ont été vaccinés puisqu'il y a l'effet placebo. Et quelle garantie on a par rapport aux effets secondaires? Il y a eu une enquête du British Medical Journal qui récapitule les fraudes commises durant l'un des essais du vaccin de Pfizer, notamment la dissimulation d'effets indésirables, la défaillance du double aveugle et des données incomplètes. Qu'a fait l'EMA par rapport à ça? Et puis alors l'autre question, elle est sur le vaccin Moderna. Vous avez vu que la Finlande, la Suède, la Norvège et le Danemark ont lancé l'alerte concernant les risques d'inflammation cardiaque et ont demandé de déconseiller cette vaccination avec le vaccin Moderna pour les moins de 30 ans, hommes ou femmes, par rapport au risque de myocardite et de péricardite.
I have the feeling you were not completely ready, but it was also more than a minute. So in that sense, the system decided. For ID, I have Joël Mélin.
Oui. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame Cook. Je ne sais pas si vous me voyez.
Excusez-moi. Could you put on your camera? Otherwise, we cannot interpret.
Ah oui. Il faut que je vais rafraîchir ma connexion si vous voulez revenir auprès de moi après. Merci beaucoup.
OK, merci. So we first then take from the left, Petros Kokales.
Thank you very much. My colleagues asked about our ability to adapt vaccines to new variants, specifically Omicron. Do you think that we should be in a constant race to develop ever new vaccines for ever new variants, or do you believe that addressing the global vaccine inequity is a more cost-efficient method to stop our march from Omicron to Omega? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We try once more with Joël Mélin.
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que la connexion est meilleure. Ouais. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame Cook. J'ai eu l'occasion d'être rapportrice sur des dossiers, au nom de la Commission ITRE, sur les dossiers de pénurie de médicaments et le renforcement du rôle de l'EMA. J'ai eu le plaisir de voir ces dossiers largement acceptés au sens où ils soutenaient un projet de coopération entre les États et l'EMA en circuit relativement court, c'est-à-dire efficace, et laissant la place aux États membres. Moi, j'ai 3 questions pour vous, Madame Cook. Premièrement, actuellement, nous vaccinons à partir d'une souche primaire qui a disparu totalement ou presque depuis 18 mois. Chaque pandémie, chaque vague doit être considérée comme une épidémie à part entière. Où en sont les travaux de modélisation sur les futures épidémies potentielles? Deuxièmement, où en sont les travaux qui ont été largement financés par l'Union européenne dès le mois de janvier 2020 concernant les thérapeutiques alternatives à la vaccination? Et enfin, il est clair, je suis au regret de devoir le redire une fois de plus, que le Remdesivir et son agrément ont été ce qu'il faut quand même appeler un raté. Comment pensez-vous, Madame Cook, éviter une nouvelle fois des travaux avec des agréments qui soient, somme toute, d'après ce qu'on a appris, incomplets? Merci de votre réponse.
Thank you very much. And we still have 5 people. I close the list now so that we can take everyone for Catch the Eye. And then there are quite some questions. So bear with us. There are 5 more coming. First of all, I would like to take Deirdre Clune.
Thank you, Ms. Cook, and thanks for reminding us that we have so many tools available 12 months on now, which is important when we're dealing with COVID. I'll just ask a few questions, really. When we're talking about strengthening the EMA, giving it more power, will you have money and people to implement that mandate? And also in regard to fast-tracking or tweaking vaccines, how does that process work? How are companies given the go-ahead, and how do you work with them, or how do they work with you? If you could give us some insight there. And I'd also like to reinforce the comments regarding clinical trials, how important they are. We've seen it in the Becca Committee, particularly access to cross-border trials for children. So they're my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For S&D, Sarah Cerdas.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor, and to Emma Cook for being here and answering all our questions. Indeed, this pandemic has shown that the agencies and member states did not have adequate resources or mandates to face a global health emergency. And we are now facing the consequences of not vaccinating everyone. And already some colleagues have been talking about the Omicron variant, and we know that we will only be safe when everyone is safe, and that's why we need a vaccine patent waiver and a broader global vaccines distribution. We hope that by reinforcing the EMA mandate, as we are doing with the other 5 from the European Health Union, the EU will take a crucial step to improve our health crisis management by addressing specific issues. And after all this work, after all the political discussions, I would like to hear your thoughts on this final proposal. If you think that with this reinforced mandate, will EMA be prepared to face a future health crisis? If this mandate were to be reinforced in 2019, would you be more capable to face a COVID-19 crisis? And second question is, how are you working to, together with HERA, to not have overlap of competencies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the Greens, Margrethe Auken.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Emma Cook, for being here and answering us questions. I'm very delighted to hear that the clinical trial regulation, although very delayed, finally comes into application on January 31, 2022. You know, I was myself a shadow on this back then, and have been very frustrated that it has just been delayed and delayed. And I know the resistance against this proposal or this law from the industry. So I am really curious, you know, in the clinical trial regulation, all information stored in the database to be publicly available unless exempted under the regulation to protect commercially confidential information, in particular the marketing authorization status of the medicine, unless there's an overriding public interest. And can you elaborate on how EMA will assess and weigh up companies' interest in secrecy versus public interest? How do you assess the public interest in getting to know all information regarding approved COVID vaccines and therapeutics? Finally, Mrs. Cook, can you confirm that all clinical trials information will be publicly available by the end of January 2022? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And for EPP, Nathalie Collin-Östle.
Bonjour, merci Monsieur le Président et merci à Madame Cook d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Alors Madame Cook, vous avez rappelé très justement que la Covid n'était pas la seule pathologie en Europe. Et justement, moi, je voudrais revenir sur un sujet qui me tient particulièrement à cœur, puisque je suis l'auteur du rapport sur les pénuries de médicaments, qui a été adopté l'an dernier. Et donc, bien sûr, dans le nouveau mandat de l'EMA, il y a de très bonnes choses, mais je regrette que ce nouveau mandat n'aille pas plus loin sur ce sujet. Parce qu'au cours des négociations, la base de données de gestion commune des stocks de médicaments que nous souhaitions a été transformée en une simple plateforme numérique contrôlant les risques de pénurie uniquement en cas de crise majeure. Or, on le sait très bien, les pénuries ne sont pas apparues avec la crise de la Covid. Elles ont été multipliées par 20 entre 2000 et 2018 au sein de l'Union européenne. Et aujourd'hui, des patients qui sont atteints d'un cancer peuvent être contraints d'arrêter leur traitement alors qu'il est disponible dans un autre État membre. C'est la raison pour laquelle le Parlement européen souhaitait cette base de données qui avait été réclamée depuis longtemps par les professionnels de santé et des associations de patients et qui avait été considérée comme une nécessité par M. Noël Vation, qui était alors directeur exécutif adjoint de l'EMA, que j'avais auditionné dans le cadre de mon rapport. Donc je crois qu'il nous faudra aller plus loin, faire de l'EMA une autorité régulatrice et pas seulement en cas de crise majeure. Alors ma question est simple. Que manque-t-il à l'agence pour assurer un suivi permanent et en temps réel des réserves de médicaments? Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas moyen d'agir avant le prochain rapport d'évaluation prévu pour 2026? Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. And last but not least, Edina Todd, non-inscrit.
Thank you, Chair and dear Director Cook. It seems that vaccines are the only weapon in the battle against the coronavirus at this moment, and everyone needs to admit that using these tools have clear public health and life-saving benefits. Personally, I believe in all vaccines, and in my opinion, member states must proceed with vaccination in all circumstances. And vaccines that are on the table of EMA and waiting for authorization have saved millions of lives worldwide already. And their approval have been delayed repeatedly, and therefore it raises a question on political ground. Why does it take EMA to evaluate the vaccines longer than expected? And I think when lives are at stake, we should put aside ideological backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the complete round of questions, and I'm very much aware that these are a lot of questions, I know. We first give the floor to the EP representatives on the EMA Management Board, so that you can probably also group some of the questions, because there were quite some different topics being addressed, so that helps you, hopefully. So first I would like to give the floor to Dr. Tonio Borg, who has been on the Management Board for a while already. Mr. Tonio Borg, good morning.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I send my regards to Emma, because she actually had a baptism of fire the moment she was appointed. I would like to highlight two things. First of all, the pressure of this pandemic and the approval of vaccines. It has probably created a lot of pressure, financial, but also as regards human resources, on EMA. How has EMA coped, and is it coping in this regard? Secondly, since I have always been in politics practically, I would like to discuss something from a political point of view. And some members have raised this issue. Sometimes EMA has been criticized. And looking backwards, it has been criticized mostly that it was slow in approving vaccines. Now, I know that when EMA approves a vaccine, it approves it for 500 million people. But there have been political criticism, sometimes even from the Commission itself. How are we going to improve our public relations, our relations with the media, to explain exactly what EMA does, the laborious process involved in the approval of medicines, that this is not a game, this is not a race. It has to be based on scientific grounds, and we have the responsibility of an entire continent in our hands. So I would like to see whether EMA will develop in the future, whether there are any plans to develop its public relations in this respect, by having a good relationship with the media, even more so now that we seem to be going into a fourth wave, or I don't know, a fifth wave, but things are not as good as we were hoping some 3 months ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also on the EMA Management Board, as EP representative and of course as former MEP, Matthias Grote. And since you will stop in April 2022, this is probably in this function going to be your last speech in the European Parliament, but I'm sure we will see you once again somewhere. Good to see you, Matthias.
Ja, für mich ist es wirklich das letzte Mal wahrscheinlich, dass ich zu Ihnen spreche. Ich habe natürlich immer verfolgt, auch aus meiner neuen Position heraus, was im Gesundheitsausschuss dann das Thema war. Ich möchte EMA Cook herzlich danken, stellvertretend für die vielen Mitarbeiter, die, glaube ich, in den letzten Monaten Unglaubliches geleistet haben. Und wir haben ja gerade darüber diskutiert, dass uns die Omikron-Variante Sorgen macht. Und da ist auch nochmal ein Punkt, der unbedingt gesetzt werden muss und auch nochmal wichtig für den Umweltausschuss ist und für den ENVI ist, wir müssen schneller werden, wirklich von der europäischen Ebene runter, wo ich jetzt auch Verantwortung trage. Wir haben hier alle 170.000 Einwohner bei mir in meinem Landkreis versucht zu impfen. Wir haben derzeit Lieferschwierigkeiten bei Impfstoffen und der Zugang zu diesen Dienstleistungen muss gewährleistet sein, in allen Mitgliedstaaten. Da kann die EMA noch so gute Arbeit machen. Wenn die Logistik nicht hinhaut, dann werden Impfkampagnen auch ins Leere laufen. Der Druck, der da gewesen ist in den letzten Wochen und Monaten, war immens. Das hat Tonio Borsch gerade schon angesprochen. Hier braucht es kein Hin- und Herspielen der Verantwortung, sondern da würde ich mir eine Einstimmigkeit vorstellen und auch die Unabhängigkeit der Agentur muss hier gewährleistet sein. Was das Thema der Mitarbeiter angeht, das ist heute noch nicht angesprochen worden, das hat jetzt nichts mit Covid zu tun, die Rahmenbedingungen. Da würde ich mir wünschen, dass auch von der EU-Kommission mehr Flexibilität eingesetzt wird. Als die EMA gewechselt ist von London dann nach Amsterdam, gab es Kriterien auch für eine europäische Schule und die Mitarbeiter brauchen dort bessere Rahmenbedingungen und das würde ich mir wünschen, dass auch mit dem Mitgliedstaat da nochmal verhandelt wird und gesprochen wird, dass direkt in der Nähe der EMA dann auch die Kinder der Mitarbeiter dann zur Schule gehen können. Das ist verbesserungswürdig. Insofern mein Plädoyer nochmal in die Runde. Bitte, bitte bleiben Sie hier am Ball. Wir werden eine Daueraufgabe haben beim Impfen. Das ist nicht 22 vorbei, sondern wir werden wahrscheinlich in den Mitgliedstaaten zu ganz anderen Maßnahmen greifen. Das Impfen jedes halbe Jahr, die Auffrischung bei dem Thema Covid ein Thema sein wird, damit wir wirklich Long-Covid und Post-Covid wirklich verhindern können, weil da rollt eine Welle auf uns zu. Herzlichen Dank, war mir immer eine Ehre, das Parlament im Verwaltungsrat der EMA zu vertreten. Ich wünsche Ihnen bei der Arbeit in Zukunft alles Gute. Ich werde es natürlich beobachten, vielleicht das ein oder andere Mal da sein. Herzlichen Dank für das Vertrauen, was Sie in mich gesetzt haben.
And thank you very much as well, Matthias Grote, for that. We have until 10:15, so I would just say you have the time. There were quite some questions indeed, so take your time, and we're very eager to hear your answers. So Emma Cook, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. And may I take off my mask?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So, first of all, let me thank you all for your interest in the agency. I think the wide range of topics that have come up and questions really emphasise the breadth of our activities, the need for your support, and the complexity of the environment in which we operate. I'm really honoured by the number of questions, and I really appreciate all the thanks and challenges that have been put to me on behalf of the agency today. I'm going to group the questions into in the different themes as I heard them, because there was quite a number of questions on the new variant, on boosters, on clinical trials and transparency, the tools of rolling review and conditional marketing authorization, the question of resources, alternative to animal methods, shortages, collaboration with HERA. How are we coping? How is EMA coping? And I'll come to that in the resources question. And of course, the global dimension of how we operate, not just in Europe, but also globally. And of course, we had some questions on the children and on the data on side effects, rare side effects with the mRNA vaccines. So let me start. I will go through these specific topics, and then I'll see, or you will see whether I have left anything out specifically. So let me first talk about the emergence of the new variant. I think it's very important to stress that we are prepared. We know that viruses mutate. We know that at some stage there will be a mutation that means we have to change the current approach. And for that reason, we put in place guidance for companies back in February last year. We haven't had to use that yet, so that's why there are not varied vaccines on the market so far, because actually the existing vaccines have shown that they continue to be effective against the circulating variants in Europe. And we don't know whether this will continue with the Omicron variant or not, but we need to make sure that we understand whether or not this will be the case. And part of the work needed to do that is to look at the cross-neutralization of the vaccines. That's a process that takes about 2 weeks. So it looks, it's a laboratory testing to see whether the vaccines whether the current vaccines do provide protection against the new variant, even though it is quite different from the existing virus sequence. The other thing we need to spend some time on is to see how, given that in the European situation is a different situation to South Africa, where we have a large number of adults vaccinated already. We've got an older population. We are in a phase of recommending booster doses. So there are a whole lot of factors ongoing at the moment that could impact the spread of the Omicron variant in Europe. So we don't know these yet, but we are working with the European institutions, with HERA, with the World Health Organization, with international regulators, and with the companies to understand all this. Now, I think it's very important that we continue to give the message that the current vaccines provide protection, and we need to ensure that those who are eligible for boosting get the booster doses. At the same time, we need to prepare in case there is a need to change the current vaccines. And that's work that the companies will do. They will have to look at adapting their formulations to include the new sequencing. They will then have to show that the production system works. They will then have to do some clinical trial to determine that this actually works in practice. Look at how the manufacturing will have to be changed. A lot of this work will have to go on at company level at this stage, but I want to assure you that we're working with the companies and with other regulators to make sure that we're as prepared and ready as possible to deal with these consequences. We think that the time from we could be in a position that were there a need to change the existing vaccines, we could be in a position to have those approved within 3 to 4 months. That's from the start of the time when they would start to change. But a decision needs to be made first whether that's necessary. And that's not a decision for the European Medicines Agency. That's a decision that will take into account the epidemiological situation, the effectiveness of the current vaccines against the variant, the circulation of the variant in Europe, and a lot of other factors. So that decision needs to be made first, and then everything else can fall in place afterwards. But I do want to assure you that this is something that we prepared for. As you said, you have adopted a piece of legislation that allows us to review this as a variation. That can be done very quickly once the data is available. So we've said what data we need, and we know how to review that. So I hope that's answered the questions on the new variant. Moving on then to the boosters. I had a couple of questions on these, and first of all I want to make it clear that the authorization in Europe is for a booster dose for adults over 18 years of age. So we have assessed the data for adults over 18 years of age. In most member states there is a progressive rollout, and this makes sense because those older patients typically would need a booster earlier. So you will see that older populations will be boosted first, and then it will be gradually rolled out to the rest of the population. So our message is we have a booster dose that is effective in adults over 18, and when the health systems are ready, it can be rolled out in accordance with the national recommendations. I did mention in my speech that the 2 boosters that we had authorized were for the Comirnaty and the Moderna vaccines, and they were authorized for adults over 18 years, boosting 6 months after the primary dose. One of the questions that has come up consistently is the need or the potential of boosting with another vaccine other than the primary vaccine. And that's something that we're now in the process of reviewing all the real-life data on this, the academic studies, the data from national systems, and we hope that we'll be able to come out with a joint statement with ECDC, possibly even by the end of this week. I had a number of questions about the rolling review and whether it was possible or that we could use it in other situations. Now, I have to say that the rolling review has been a very, very effective tool for us in dealing with the complexities and the sequential data that has been coming in the context of the COVID vaccines and therapeutics. But it's not something that we would be able to use for every product across the board. It takes considerable resources. So while I'm confident that we will maintain this as part of our toolbox, we have to be very careful that we prioritise those applications that will benefit most from the rolling review. So it's a question of priority and using our resources effectively. In this respect, I think we have to be very conscious that we have finite resources in the system, so we cannot do everything at the same time. We need to prioritise, and that's probably the most important message. But certainly we see rolling review as an important tool going forward, but the type of products that it could be used for will have to be carefully considered. Just Coming to the question of resources, I was asked about resources in a number of different ways. Firstly, in terms of the extended mandate, did we have sufficient resources to deal with that? So I'm going to address that separately. And then in the context of all the priorities and all the challenges that we have in front of us, do we have the resources to deal with these as well? And how are we coping? I think that's a very important question, and it's a very human question. It's not just about money. This is about how are we as a system coping. I mean, I think we have to recognize that everybody is under severe pressure here. And if you think about it from your own perspectives, our lives have changed. My staff have moved from London to Amsterdam. They've moved then into a COVID crisis. They've then had increasing more and more workload on them. So it's not an easy time. It's not an easy time for anybody, and I think we really have to appreciate that. And I have to say, I really appreciate the wonderful work that our experts are doing and the work of our staff are doing. But let me come to a few specifics. So on the extended mandate, the package that the Commission put forward in the original legislative package did come with an additional 40 staff over the period, over the 7-year period, and it also came with an additional 100 million again over the same period. So this was based on the package that the Commission put on the table. Now, I know you're all very interested in the shortages platform, and we really appreciate the work that went into putting a very comprehensive proposal on the table to better deal with shortages. But this differs from what was in the original package, so we don't know. We still have to evaluate exactly what the resource consequences of that will be. So I would say on the extended mandate, we're hopeful that we do have the resources, but we need to address the delta between the original Commission proposal and what will be finally adopted. And then if I could come on to the general resourcing situation, because our big challenge is that we're a successful agency and success breeds success. We have, since 2014, we have increased our activity by 43%. And during that time, apart from specific short-term tasks, or indeed the extended mandate, our actual establishment plan has been reduced by 10%. So you can see immediately that there's a mismatch there between what we're required to do and what our establishment plan, our staffing plan, allows us to do. So are we coping? Well, we need help. I think we definitely need help. I have a very, very motivated staff. We've had to prioritise a lot of the COVID work. People are working around the clock. Every time we think we've got to the end of a wave, we breathe a sigh of relief, and then another new challenge comes ahead of us. So I think we can be confident that we can't rest for a while. So we do need additional human resources. We need to be able to do not just the COVID work, but also all the work that allows us to publish the clinical trial results, that allows us to do the access to document requests, that allows us to ensure that we protect the personal data of any subject in any transfer of data, that we can ensure that we're making the right decisions on confidentiality of the data submitted. So we were disappointed that the 20 posts that we had asked for our 22, our mandate, our work programme for 22 were not accepted. And we would very much like to draw to your attention to the need to ensure that we have consistent and sustainable staffing to allow us to do our work. I do want to bring a little bit of a personal note into this because I think we don't know the implications of COVID, but we do know that working in different situations, for some people this causes additional health and mental strain, and this is something we're also seeing from our own staff. We have increasing number of staff on long-term sick leave, which again, as the executive director, that's something I have to be very concerned about. So we also need a buffer to allow some people to have some rest. So moving on then to the clinical trial regulation, we are very excited to see this coming into reality next year. And all this comes with increasing transparency, increasing coordination across Europe, increasing digitalization, and also an opportunity for us to do clinical trials better across Europe, to be more connected. So we're very excited about the opportunities that creates. But I did want to say specifically on the publication of clinical trial data that we are committed to transparency. For all the COVID vaccines and therapeutics, we have published the clinical trial data. We've done that very quickly following the authorization, and we are committed to doing that. Now, this is an area where we are under-resourced, so in terms of moving this to every product that's coming through, this is causing us some challenges at the moment. But for all the COVID vaccines, we have published the data on which the authorizations were based. I wanted to just say a word about the 3 Rs and the animal testing. Yes, we have started to reactivate our working group on replacement, refinement and reduction of animal testing. This is something that we are very much committed to. We've started to look at what our work plan what work plan we could put in place. It's linked to a review of our working party structure, but we will be finalising that during 2022. On the subject of HERA, HERA is the new kid on the block. I think we've started off very well because already we're involved in the advisory board or the steering committee of HERA. In fact, the second meet, I personally am participating in these discussions. We are planning to develop a memorandum of understanding that makes it clear, very clear, what's under our responsibility and what's under HERA responsibility. And I think the key here is to make sure we have effective coordination across the HERA and our own activities. And I would say I'm very confident that that's going to be the case. So I hope I've addressed most of the issues that you have identified. There were a large number of other questions that I haven't been managed to put into the full response. I'm very happy to provide written responses on those because I have answers. It's just I don't always have the time to do this to your committee. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much once more, and also very much appreciated your offer to give answers in written. I do think you addressed the most important topics where most of the questions were on, but you're right that there were, of course, some specific questions that you, well, for the sake of time, could not go into, and we appreciate very much to get written answers on that. And also, thank you also for your personal notes, and I think we all recognize the strain you were talking about, which indeed is also for our staff here in this European Parliament. So thank you once more. It was a real pleasure to see you, and well, as you said, we're in this for a long while still, so hopefully in better occasions we see you the next time, but probably COVID will still be on the agenda also by then. I would like to thank everyone. The next topic will also deal with the discharge of EMA, but I can tell you in the draft report already also the point of staffing and the right financing is being addressed, so it is certainly a priority for the European Parliament. But that topic will be done by the chair of ENVI, who is also the rapporteur of the draft report, so he will have a lot of hats to play with in the next points on the agenda. So I happily give the floor now to Pascal Canfin after I once more thank you very much for this exchange of views.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your support.
Thanks.